Well, hello, everyone. This is Tulani Bridgewater Kowalski with The Wolfer, and I am thrilled to welcome Kristin van Ogtrop today. She is the author of Did I Say That Out Loud? Midlife Indignities and How to Survive Them. And certainly this is something I can relate to and I'm thrilled to discuss with you a little bit more. But Kristin, hello, and maybe you can introduce yourself just a little bit to our audience, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Hi, Tulani. Thanks so much for this afternoon. So let's see, introduce myself. Wow, that's a lot of pressure. So I'm 57 years old. I've been married to the same man for almost 30 years. I've got 3 children, all boys, 2 dogs, live in the New York suburbs, was a longtime magazine editor, and now I'm a literary agent, and I have no hobbies except for gardening.
Okay,
How was that?
That was perfect. That was exactly right. Well, so the first thing that I was telling you before we started the interview is that I really have enjoyed reading your book. And I think obviously I'm your prime demographic. So there's that, because I'm 48 years old.
Yeah.
I've been married to the same person for 20 some odd years, 2 kids, 2 dogs, yada, yada. But I'm going to be moving to the suburbs of LA. So, you know, everyone likes to say this resonated with me. And it did. It resonated with me. In fact, before you even really launched into the book itself, your foreword or introduction,
Yeah.
I like got teary-eyed because I was like, someone understands what I'm going through.
Oh, well, that's good, I guess.
Yeah,
it's a bit bad for both of us. Well, and so just for those of you who are here today who haven't read the book, which is probably everybody, the introduction to the book talks about how I was very skeptical about mindfulness. I thought it was just a bunch of hooey, but then but everyone around me is so mindful now. So I went to a meditation class, and the teacher said something in the class that really made me think, oh yeah, so maybe this is mindfulness really is maybe a thing. and then I went home and I was having people over for dinner that night, friends for dinner. And I thought I was like so together, like, you know, and Tulani, I'm sure you have days like this too. Like you have a busy life, which is wonderful to have a busy life, and, you know, a full life, I should say, not busy. It's wonderful to have a full life. Mm-hmm. And you really feel like you're hitting it out of the park on days when you like the to-do list is organized and you get through it. And anyway, I was having one of those days, like I went to my class and then I was having friends for dinner and I was like so organized. And then I ended up I was having 8 people for dinner, and it had always been 8 people. And I set the table for 10. And when they sat down, they were like, are more people coming? And I just, like, for some reason, I thought we were having 10 people for dinner. And like, it was so perfect in some weird region of my brain that isn't connected to reality.
You know what?
I don't know if that's the part that made you cry.
It was just all of it, because I think, and so it's the indignities, but they're also wonderful blessings. And I love that you kind of stay with that theme throughout the book, which is, you know, what's the alternative? So the alternatives are not great, right? It's like being dead, having dementia, you know, being penniless, having a terminal illness. But then there's also humor in like, oh, well, that's where I'm going to find comfort, you know?
Yeah.
At least I'm still alive. But there's really a truly sort of human and compassionate element to all of it, which I really appreciated, because I think, especially as women, and you have this wonderful career as a professional woman, but also a parent. And so like, I'm trying to lean in all the time, which that was, for some reason, mindfulness for you was like, leaning in. I was like, what is this? What is this leaning in business?
Yeah.
But it's, you know, we're not as kind to ourselves, I think, and especially when we start to enter middle age and things start going incredibly haywire, and we don't understand why. And you're setting, you know, the table for 10 when it's really 8. Today I had you also start seeing a lot of doctors. Yours was more extreme. You had to have emergency surgery.
Yeah.
And which, that's the cover. This is like an Easter egg here.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to share a little bit about this cover.
Okay, so the cover of my book is, I guess, clue. I don't know. Is that a clue? There, you notice there's something missing from the fork. And so the first essay of the book is called Fork Lady, and it describes what was my first adult real sort of health emergency, when I had a surprise encounter with a plastic fork that ended up in a part of my body it wasn't supposed to be in. Is that enough, Tulani? Is that enough to get people to read the book?
Yeah, we don't want to give too much away, but you know, it's one of those things like these, you know, we go through the first part of our lives and we have all these oops moments and we kind of like bypass them and they kind of fall by the wayside. And then the oops moments start to have real consequences when we reach middle age and beyond. But I think we also start to think about these things a lot more deeply because we're really confronted by our mortality. And it could be a plastic fork. It could be, you know, thinking, oh my God, maybe I'm losing my mind. I set the table for too many people. And in my case, I went to see my neurologist this morning and I drove to the wrong building. And when they called me, they're like, where are you? And I was like, I have no idea. I don't know where I am. And I don't know why I'm here. And I will get there as soon as I can.
We do have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Well, clearly I need to be seeing you. So it's good that I'm on my way eventually. But
no, but you do have these things. I mean, you're right. Like that's, you know, at the end of that essay, I talk about how I have a good friend who's a doctor. Her name is Nandini. And Nandini was the one who prompted me to go to the hospital after this stupid thing that I did. And at the end, she said to me, as I was still in the hospital, but I was going to get out like the following day. And she said, you know, you're lucky, like this could have killed you. And in fact, when I had my follow-up appointment with the surgeon, he was like, this could have killed you. And it was the first time, like, I'm sure we all have, and times when like, you don't know it, but you almost got hit by that bus, or you don't know it, but, you know, and it was the first time that something happened to me. And later I knew that it had happened. Well, I obviously knew it had happened, but later I thought, okay, I could be dead from this thing that happened. And aren't I so glad I'm not dead?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really where the beautiful part of life starts to happen is I'm so grateful, because I think we take so many things for granted, especially when we're younger. And then we transition from being younger and not knowing better into, in many cases, being really busy and consumed with all these outward things, like our careers and other people and our, you know, buying that house or achieving that next, you know, promotion or whatever. And then you enter into this next phase and all of a sudden, you know, I kind of joke when I got to this age and people started saying, you're so wise. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not really wise. I'm like, I've survived this long. And so I have a collection of files that I can refer to. And that's, I think, what they're mistaken for wisdom. But yeah, you start to get to this stage of life, and it can, I think for a lot of people, especially up until recently, it's been perceived as like the beginning of the slow death, right?
Right.
We're now trudging, especially as women, we're not fertile, we're not youthful, we're not all of these, whatever these things are. And so we're kind of like, they want to just put us on the ice floe, give us that piece of leather to chew on and just like push us out to sea. Clearly that's not, you know, that's not our reality. We're still vibrant and whatever, but part of it is learning that compassion for ourselves, and finding the humor. And you've got nothing but humor. Even the sad things have something really poignant in them, you know?
Well, I wanted to say something about what you just said about middle age. I think that, and we can talk about poignant stuff too if you want. I think that middle age, it gets such a bad rap, right? Like it's like the punchline of a joke. And like you said, particularly for women, like there were certainly times in my career when I was working at the end of my magazine career, when I was working with mostly younger women. And even though I was the boss, I felt not invisible, but less relevant, less culturally relevant. But what I feel about middle age, and I hope the book communicates this, is I feel like it's sort of like you're at the top of you're in the middle of a hike, and you've walked up this steep incline, and then you're about to have a decline, and you can look behind you and go, wow, that was hard. You know, like you look at your 20s and 30s, like I hated my 20s. You look at your like 20s and 30s, and for me 40s, and think, well, that was kind of hard. And then you look forward and it's decline. You're like, oh, that looks kind of hard too. But like you're standing at the top and it's sort of perfect,
Mhm.
you know, and you've gained the wisdom from the hard climb up, and you know enough that the descent's going to be rocky, but you're resting there and you're so happy to have such a good view. Like that's kind of how I think about middle age.
I think that's, yeah, I completely agree. Now, I think once you reach that peak, there's a lot of acclimation that has to happen, because it's like all of the atmospheric,
Yeah, it's really windy.
yeah, it's windy, the air is a little thinner, the sun is a little beating down on you a little bit harder, you might get dehydrated faster, but it is wonderful. And I love that you talk about the fact that there's a lot that's wonderful. And I think there was another reference in the beginning of the book, to looking at a door frame and seeing, the chip paint, and maybe it's worn, but it's also the memories that are evoked of, when your child is younger and they run their big wheel into it, and how much importance that has, and the fact that that feeling is what's really more critical. And so I think in ways we kind of evolve into, I don't want to call it higher thinking, because that creates some sort of valuation, but we evolve into a different kind of thinking, where the things that concerned us before sort of fall away. And so and you talked about your friend who's I think you said his uncle was on his deathbed, or grandfather.
Oh yeah, his father.
Yeah, so if you could share that, because I thought that was beautiful. It hit a really perfect spot for me.
It's my friend Rob, whose father died at the age of 88. And when Rob's father was on his deathbed, he asked Rob, what do you think is more important, thoughts or feelings? And I've never asked myself that. That question has never occurred to me. But, I go on to write how I feel like it's the feelings that endure. Even if your thoughts think you're having 10 people over for dinner, your feelings are that you're excited to have those people over for dinner. But yeah, like the chip door frame in the dining room, I look around my house, and there are things that I used to care about so much, like I'm looking at your living room, or wherever that beautiful place is where you're sitting, and it looks so perfect and really like clean and beautiful. And when I look around my house, there have been times when my house has been clean and beautiful, but like there's so many things now where I think, oh, I don't know, do I care about that anymore? I don't know. And there are like, I'll just say one thing. We had my eldest son, who's now 25, was really into Legos, and he would construct these like elaborate sort of chute systems and stuff. So he had this like really thick cardboard tube that like a poster comes in. And when he was probably 12 years old, he hung it from one of the railings on our stairway up on the second floor. So it wasn't in like a public space, but there was this piece of cardboard hanging from a piece of butcher's twine, this tube. And it stayed there for probably 10 years. And my middle son was like, when are you going to take that thing away? And I said, never. I'm never taking it away. Because it looks ridiculous. If you walked into my house, you'd be like, what the hell? Why is there a cardboard tube tied to your staircase? But I know, I look at that cardboard tube and I know how it makes me feel, and it makes me remember things when I had a 12-year-old boy who would throw Legos down that tube, and he's 25 now, and it makes me happy. It makes me sad, and it makes me happy.
Yeah. No, I can relate to that. I think my kids are a little bit younger. I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, but I already feel, nostalgia in advance. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm projecting myself forward. Like we don't talk about when they're going to move out, because I become this kind of inconsolable, sad version of myself.
You have a ways to go, and they may never move out. Listen, in the pandemic, and I write about this in the book, I have a 14-year-old son, and then I've got a 22-year-old son and a 25-year-old son, and everybody's here. So like my big boys have been living at home for the last year. So your children may never move out, actually. If you make them really comfortable, they'll never move out.
Don't tell them that I don't want them to. They don't listen or watch this. So
Yeah.
they have no idea. Although sometimes when they're gaming, I have thoughts of throwing them out of the house, but that's,
Yes,
that's
natural.
Yeah.
That's natural. Or to me.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your experience transitioning from, because you were editor-in-chief for Real Simple magazine. And you'd been writing for Time, and you had a very different sort of career. And then you transitioned into the career you have now. So now you're an agent and you're also an author, multiple times over author. If you could tell us a little bit about that transition, because I think it's pretty interesting.
Oh, okay. So, well, I wrote my first book a while ago. It was 10 years ago. And my agent is this man named Richard Pine, who is a longtime literary agent. And so I wrote that book and published that book when I was the editor of Real Simple, which was a really, really, I see the boss lady pillow on your sofa back there. It was a great boss lady job. And it was just a great job. I mean, it was fun. My skills and the requirements of the job were really well aligned. And the brand was growing. It was one of those things that it was just a great job. And I knew it was a great job when it was my job. And then as the magazine industry started to really change, and people like my 20-something sons started reading everything on their phones, and digital advertising couldn't plug the gap that the loss of print advertising had created. Revenues started to decline, and then my job really became about managing decline, and that just sucked. So I was the editor of Real Simple for 13 years, and it was great for probably 8. It was sort of perfect for like 8 or 9 years. And then the last few years were just, like death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of. So I finally decided to leave at the end of 2016. I had fired, and I write about this in the book. I had fired so many people over the years, and I realized I could keep doing that, or I could fire myself, basically. And it's funny that you mentioned Lean In, because Lean In came out, I guess, in 2013, maybe. And when Lean In came out, I was, in my late 40s, I guess. And then it just made me so tired. All the 20-something women who worked for me were really, and rightly so, like energized by the message and felt really inspired and empowered by it. And it just made me feel tired, and I didn't want to lean in, as you said. So I felt like I'd leaned in already, and now I wanted to lean back, or at least like sit up straight. So I quit Time Inc., which was the company that owned Real Simple, at the end of 2016. And I had never, and this is probably true for a lot of women in the Wolfer community, like you get on a track and you stay on the track. And if you're just smart and not insane, and you're lucky, you become more and more successful, hopefully. And then, but always in the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh, well, should I have done that other thing instead all along? Like, is my real destiny to be something completely different from this? And so I left my magazine career not wanting to do anything but take a pottery class, which I did, and which I kind of suck at pottery, as it turns out. But I tried. I thought, like, maybe I should be. I've never been a stay-at-home mom, and I was raised by a stay-at-home mom, and I had a really happy childhood. And my youngest son at that point was in 4th grade. And so, like I would take him to school every day and pick him up every day. And I really, our babysitter was conveniently moving to Turkey at the same time. So we said goodbye to Renata, and I became Axel's full-time mom / caregiver. And so I did that. I volunteered for a nonprofit. I took a nonprofit leadership class, because so should I really be a stay-at-home mom was here. Should I work in the nonprofit space was here, like, and be a better person, basically, and do something useful for the world. And neither of those roles seemed to fit me very well. And so when I had left Real Simple, going back to Richard Pine, my agent, he sent me an email and he said, you either need to come work at Inkwell as an agent or you need to write another book. And I was going to say for better or for worse, but probably for worse. Like my career has really mostly been very reactive. You know, I've never been a person who's good at kind of sitting down with a plan and saying, here's my goal and here are the steps I'm going to take to get to that.
See, I take issue with you saying it's bad, because I think most of us are really, when we boil it down, we're reactive because we have circumstances, right? And then we have these external forces that come to bear. And so we make decisions, and those decisions are by necessity reactive. You know, we can have, because you know what happens when you make plans. First of all, you make plans, they don't come to fruition. Or sometimes you're like, oh my God, I wish they hadn't come to fruition, because you end up someplace that you're like, oh, actually, this is pretty awful, but I constructed this new reality. So I guess I'm stuck here. So I want you to like, I reject that it's not
okay.
good.
I accept your rejection of that. But I didn't do like other women in my position would have like gone onto LinkedIn and looked for things and like I didn't do any of that, you know, like I just thought I know a lot of people. I'm a smart person. I'm taking a break. And then I ended up talking to this other agency for completely different reasons. And I called Richard and I was like, so if I go work for this other literary agency, would you still be my agent? And he was like, wait, hold on a minute. Like, don't you remember that email I sent you? So I guess reactive purely is not entirely accurate, in that in those 2 years between leaving magazines and going to work at Inkwell Management, I did try some other things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of like Goldilocks in the beds, like nothing really fit. And when you look at what a literary agent does, which is work with writers, identify really wonderful content, you have to have good people skills. Like there are definitely significant alignments with my previous career. It's not like I went off and, you know, became a master welder or something, you know, like there are things that are very similar. So anyway, so that's a long answer to your question, but that's how I got from A to B.
Well, the reason that I really wanted you to talk about, and I appreciate you sharing that, is because a lot of women within our community, but also just a lot of women in general, when we hit this phase of life, we're reevaluating everything. And the things that used to fit don't fit anymore, or they're not available to us anymore. And so we go through these periods of upheaval and kind of recreation. It's like we're like Madonna used to be. You know? Like we're like, okay, I'm gonna go from this person I was, and you know, the core of you stays consistent more or less, but you're like, okay, but everything else is shifting around you. And so you start recreating that. And I know I can identify with that. And I think anyone listening or watching us can identify, because the pandemic has forced almost everyone to have to go through that as well. Some of us, our industries shut down completely or disappeared, or a position got phased out and so forth. And so there are a lot of people taking pottery, well, not taking pottery class, taking online pottery classes, you know what I mean? Taking master classes online, or, you know, rethinking what they're going to do. And what I really find wonderful about what happened with you is that the outcome was good. So in this maelstrom of confusion, there's something where we can all just trust that, you know what, it's still progress. We're trying things on, we're figuring things out, and the outcome may not even be what we think it's going to be, but we're going to get through this phase. And I think that's like a good message.
Well, you know, I mean, when I left my longtime career, a lot of people said to me, oh, you're so brave. It's so brave that you're doing this. And I thought, like, I'm not brave. I'm just super unhappy, you know, and I'm willing to take this risk. And it was sort of like that description Hemingway has of going bankrupt. You go bankrupt slowly and then all at once. And that's sort of like what, you know, like my career was getting slowly more awful. But I didn't, you know, I wasn't an idiot about it. I had an employment contract. I talked to my lawyer. I talked to my financial advisor. Like I had this group of people sort of walking me through different eventualities, all of which I was comfortable enough with to make that big change. So it wasn't like an impulsive thing, you know?
Right. Well, you characterize yourself in the book, and now that I'm meeting you, as being, a rather practical person, even keeled, and making sage decisions. And so I think that falls right in line with it. But I'm sure that the way it feels is quite different from what it looks like on the outside. Because
Yes.
when you're inside a hurricane and the chaos is swirling around,
Yeah.
it's really unsettling.
Yeah.
So even if the view is great, to use your your image before, even if the view is great up there, no one's seeing you like clutching onto everything to try and not
Right.
fall off this mountaintop.
And it
So.
wasn't all like rainbows and unicorns, like when I left my job, and it was euphoria, which moved into contentment, which moved into kind of general happiness, which moved into like, what the hell? Like, what am I doing? So it wasn't, there were various phases. And then I landed back in another job, and I felt like, okay, like now I know who I am again. And that's, I mean, that's a little screwed up that it needs a job, that I feel like I'm the kind of person that needs a job to help define who I am in the world.
Well, but you're not alone. I mean, I think that that's part of why everyone's going through these existential crises. I don't know about you, but in my universe of people, there's a lot of angst and upset because people's careers have gone away. And so their identity is so enmeshed that they don't know who they are anymore. And that's part of our cultural, structure. But it's also, it's how we self-identify. It's like what you say in your 30-second introduction. Usually there's mention of your career,
Right.
It's part of who you are. So that doesn't really surprise me. I kind of am jokingly wish that I could have you show me one of your pieces of pottery. Your pottery is probably like my poetry.
I've got one right here.
Stop.
So this is a mug I made for my son, Axel. So my pottery teacher was this woman, Susan, who's Hungarian, and she had sort of a heavy accent, and she was always saying, I need more texture. You need more texture. You need more texture. And so I took a comb and I went like this, right? But like for the potters out there, like the handle is really hard to do. But I signed it underneath. I put a KVO underneath. And so I do use this mug, but this is like as good as it got. I mean, it's just, it's a useful object, but like I'm not winning any prizes for my pottery.
I love that though. During the pandemic, I tried to write poetry.
Yeah, how'd it go?
It was terrible, and I don't recommend it. And that's like, first of all, the hubris. I'm going to write poetry.
Oh yeah, right, exactly. I'm going to be potter.
Good at these other things. I'm sure this won't be. And I actually did a voice recording of it and sent it to a dear friend of mine. And I was like, you're the only person who's going to hear this, and please delete it when you're done.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
Did your friend agree with you that it was terrible?
She never, let's put it this way, because she's very kind. She never encouraged me to write more.
Oh, that sounds like a good friend. That's a perfect friend, actually. Yeah, that's all you needed.
Really, truly, yes. Okay, so you mentioned some of your philanthropic work. What fills yours? What were you doing? What was it that was driving you to that?
So I write about this in the book. One of the book is mostly funny, but there are a couple of sad essays in the book, and one of them is about when our dog, we had a dog who drowned, and so it was all the dogs that we've always had are guiding eyes for the blind puppies that like don't cut it as guide dogs basically, and they're put up for adoption. And so this dog's name was Rebel. He was so sweet. He was such a cute dog. And after Rebel, and when you adopt a dog from Guiding Eyes for the Blind, the headquarters of which is like 40 minutes from my house in Westchester County, it's not like you're like going to a breeder and getting a dog. Well, I don't know. Actually, I've never gotten a dog from a breeder. You feel like you have this emotional connection to Guiding Eyes. And the amount of literature that they give you when you bring the dog home, and and then they check in with you like every 6 months. You get an email because their genetics program is so developed that they really want to see what the traits of the different litter mates look like, blah blah blah. Anyway,
Mhm.
so you feel like you're part of this thing, even though you own the dog, it's still part of this community. So when Rebel died, I felt this terrible guilt. And I knew that I wasn't working, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go volunteer for Guiding Eyes for the Blind. And so every Monday I would go up to Guiding Eyes and I would clean out the kennels. And I will say one thing about every Monday about a dramatic career change in midlife, which I didn't know would happen. One day when I was driving up to Guiding Eyes, I heard an interview with Bono and The Edge, because U2 was releasing like some remastered something, I can't remember. And I remembered that there was a moment in my corporate life when I had dinner with Bono and a bunch of other editors at Time Inc. And there I was in like my smelly kennel clothes, listening to NPR, driving up to the kennels. And I thought, wow, like the people who work at Guiding Eyes think that I'm just like nice suburban mom with blonde hair who comes and gets the hose out every Monday, and like the dichotomy between where my life was driving up to those kennels and what my life had been was so stark. And I was the only one who knew it, Anyway, that's really a more longer answer to your question than you were looking for, but I did a lot of work for Guiding Eyes, and I did a little bit of consulting for Guiding Eyes. And I just think that the metabolism of the nonprofit world it's not one that I understand.
Yeah, first of all, I love that you did that, and thank you for sharing. And you totally look like you could have had dinner with Bono. But there is, I was also curious selfishly, because I have just in the past 2 years started working in the nonprofit sector, and I come exclusively from for-profit.
Mhm.
And I adore what I do, and I'm going to continue doing it, but I do not understand the nonprofit universe and structure and nomenclature. I mean, for people who work in the nonprofit sector, I'm sure they feel the same way when they go into the for-profit sector.
Mhm.
But they're like from another planet, and the way
Yeah.
that it functions is very confusing to me, and things I really take for granted don't exist there. So, and there's a lot of rigidity, which it seems like rigidity, I guess, because I don't understand it. So I was also just curious for my own, self-interest. But I love that you did that, and I am sorry about your dog. That was really
Well, you know what? If he hadn't died, we would not have gotten Crazy Jill, who is the craziest, most amazing dog we've ever had. So there was a silver lining there. And I mean, one more thing I will say about nonprofits, having been, I always worked for really big corporations.
Mhm.
And I took another thing I did in my 2 years off is I took this nonprofit leadership class. And so it was me and 21 other people, 21 other adults who worked or lived in Westchester County. And I think they all, with maybe just one or two exceptions, all worked in nonprofits.
Mm.
And I went to the first class, and it was like, I felt, and this is going to be, well, you can judge me for saying this because I sound insane, but I felt like it was like Elle Woods going to Harvard Law School in Legally Blonde. Like I was Elle Woods, and I was like, hey. And like everyone else around, they're all such wonderful people, but like I just felt like, oh man, like I do not speak this language.
Yeah.
And it was a year-long class, and it was great, and I've maintained some really good friendships from that class, but that's what it felt like at the beginning. Like
Yeah.
I was the ditzy corporate girl in that class, and which is not, I don't mean people in the corporate world are ditzy, but that's how I felt.
Yeah. Well, and see, and I feel like this ogre creature that's dragging a sack of gold behind them, because I'm like, can't we monetize this somehow? Can't we sell this? Can't we charge people to do it?
Yeah, see, it's not, you can't, like, it's not an easy transition mindset wise.
No, not at all. So I commend you, because I'm 2 years in, and I'm still like, they're still having to repeat to me, no, we're giving this to people. I'm like, but why, when they would pay good money, So it's a big transition. I know we're kind of coming to the end of our time, but to go back to the book, I really encourage everybody to read it because it felt like I was sitting with a friend. And it's not often that you get that experience. And especially if you're in our age group, to have such humor and such compassion on the page for something that we're all going through in different sorts of ways was really wonderful. And my husband came in and I was like cackling. And he's like, what? And I was like, oh, I was like, no, it's fine. It's fine. I'm like, she gets it. She gets it.
Well, we all have more in common than we have, than we have differences, I think.
Definitely.
And I do hear that a lot about this book, which is very satisfying for me, like feeling like you're just talking to a friend.
Yeah.
I don't use very big words. I guess maybe that's part of it. But just the sense of, it's a community of like-minded women who, even though our lives are all really different, there's a through line.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you get to the heart of so much of what we're all experiencing. So I guess I should ask you a question in closing. You're now we're almost through the pandemic, we hope.
Mm-hmm.
Fingers crossed. How are you feeling? How has it been? Are you okay? Because everybody is like not really asking, are you okay?
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I was on the phone with a client today and she said, hi, how are you? And I was like, well, because you really have to think about it. And I don't think she was expecting me to actually really answer her. But we're fine. Look, we are fine. I mean, I do write, there's a chapter at the end of the book called My Fraternally, which is about how living with all of my sons in the house is like living in a fraternity house during the pandemic. And but I look at most people, not most, I don't know most, so many people in this pandemic have had it so much worse than my family has. We've all been healthy. We're all mostly vaccinated now. None of us got COVID-19. We remained employed and we had enough food.
There you go.
No, like what else do you need? Nothing. In a world like the world we've lived in the last year, you don't need anything more than that.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking. We have been just fine.
Good. I'm happy to hear that.
And I hope you have too. Have you been just fine? Fine enough?
You know what? Yes, I am fine enough. I have food, I have a roof, I have money in the bank, food in the refrigerator, my children have their health. I'm, for the most part, intact. My marriage is in a good place. Right. And, my loved ones are okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm wealthy when you talk about it in those terms, and I'm overabundantly wealthy. So thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Fine enough is enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Kristin. Everybody,
oh my gosh.
once again, please pick up a copy of Did I Say That Out Loud by Kristin van Ogtrop. And we just are delighted. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's been really great to talk to you today.
You too.